Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. I beg leave before I make my contribution to, like my colleague Senator did, to thank the Parliament for the opportunity of attending the Impact Justice Conference, which I thought was very insightful and useful. I also want to extend sincere condolences to a couple of families from my community who suffered the loss of a loved one in very tragic circumstances overnight. Madam President, I am always early for sitting, and this morning you may have noticed that I was late. I hope that they'll be able to get through this, and offer them my prayers and support. The Thomas and Polius families of the Blanchard community, Chic Blanchard community in my area. Madam President, I don't think that we will ever give the impression that this opposition or any one of us on this side will be opposed to a motion, a bill, or any resolution that seeks to address the plight or the situation that our St. Lucian folk face. So, with reference to this this motion, affirmative resolution tabled here to include or make amendments to include funeral package, funeral home, and so on. I think that we should all be able to see that we welcome this move. However, Madam President, when you support a bill or motion, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything about it is perfect or everything about it is good. Likewise, when you do not support a motion or a bill, it does not suggest that everything about it is bad. A bill or a motion can come to this House and gain the support of all of us, but it doesn't suggest that it's because there's no problem with it. Perhaps we support the principle behind it. And so, Madam President, I'm saying this to suggest that while the opposition and myself will give our support to any bill that seeks to provide relief for St. Lucians, we must not forget to pay attention to specific areas or specific things that can be done to improve it, because that's why sometimes we return to the House to make amendments, because we recognize that some things about bills and motions can be improved, or that we fail to recognize the implications of these bills and how it can affect persons even when the intention is good. And so, Madam President, I make reference specifically to the reduction that is proposed here and how it's going to relieve persons who have lost loved ones. I reflect again on the family I mentioned, or the families I mentioned. And this is a real situation. I believe that they would welcome a relief. But we also have to think of families who have deaths on their hands and may not even begin to think about how they're going to raise the money to bury a loved one. We have to be very realistic, Madam President, and be considerate, and do not assume that everyone will be able to meet the cost, and therefore when they get the reduction it will be good. We must not forget families that in this, as we speak, Madam President, where I'm from, there are families who have deaths on their hands and they seek assistance all over the place to even meet the cost of the burial. And are we paying attention to their plight? Or are we assuming that they can come up with $3, $10, $15, $50,000 to bury their loved ones, and then we'll give them a break by, removing VAT? I am not against the break. But what about those who can't even begin to figure out how they are going to raise that money? And depending on the circumstances, Some of them may have to even try to get the state to help to do the burial. So are we looking at a policy shift perhaps, where we can include other avenues that can take care of families that may not even be able to benefit from what we're offering in this resolution? This is where I really am going, Madam President. And while the exemption may sound good, I think that some families, because of misplaced policies by this government, that have landed them jobless. They are young persons who had a job prior to 2016, and they are now unemployed. And when they have a loved one, the young man I'm referring to this morning has children. And when they have a loved one, or they have suffered a loss, because they are now jobless, because they are no longer working, they probably were assistants to principals under the NICE program, and they have no more work. Now they can't even think of how they're going to find the money to bury a loved one. Far less get that. They cannot even enjoy the exemption that we're talking about this morning. So, Madam President, it is good to assume that when we come to the House and we talk nice and fancy about VAT exemptions, reducing VAT, that we think that everybody's benefiting. But that's not the case. The reality is that's not the case, Madam President. And we must spare thought for those who are not in a position to benefit from these reductions. And in our social transformation policies, we have a Minister for Health here. We have a Minister for Equity in this government. We need to begin to think of policies and strategies that can help us meet the needs of these people, because they are people too. They also matter. And we don't want to miss anybody. We don't want to leave anyone behind. And so, Madam President, my submission this morning is simply based on this point. That I think about families like the one who suffered the death overnight, whether they can even begin to think of how they're going to meet the cost. And unfortunately, may not be able to benefit from that move. Before I end, Madam President, I want to join my colleagues in wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, including yourself, a productive and prosperous 2020, and hope that with whatever little that we have for the season, we make the best of it and return here next year in good health to continue the business of this House. I thank you, Madam President.